This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Wednesday, June 30th. Welcome to Africa 54. We continue to work remotely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. Here is today's Africa 54. Former South African President Jacob Zuma has been found guilty of contempt of court and sentenced to prison after failing to appear before a corruption inquiry. Soraya Ali has the details.
A South African court has ordered that former President Jacob Zuma be imprisoned for 15 months after failing to appear before a corruption inquiry earlier this year. Justice Sisi Khampepe delivered the verdict on Tuesday at the Constitutional Court.
It is declared that Mr. Jacob Zuma-Hlengisa Zuma is guilty of the crime of contempt of court for failure to comply with the order made by this court in Secretary of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector.
She said Zuma, who ruled South Africa between 2009 and 2018, must submit himself to a police station within 5 days. Zuma failed to appear at the corruption inquiry in February. It's examining allegations of high-level graft during his period in power. Zuma has denied wrongdoing and so far has not cooperated.
Soraya Ali of Reuters filed that report. Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta has announced that the East African nation will receive its first batch of 13 million COVID-19 vaccine shots from Johnson & Johnson in August. Like other nations on the continent, Kenya has struggled to secure vaccines for its citizens to allow it to fully lift restrictions aimed at containing the pandemic. The nation's health ministry says 1 million Kenyans out of 47 million have had a first jab and only 300,000 are fully vaccinated. As a result of the deal for the J&J shots and other initiative, the country will accelerate its vaccine deployment plan. Kenya had struck a deal to get 13 million shots from Johnson & Johnson for the price of 10 million doses, according to Kenyatta. Because the vaccine is administered in a single shot, Kenyatta says it will help hasten Kenya's program with 150,000 doses being administered daily from August. Meanwhile, Kenyatta extended COVID-19 restrictions, including an overnight curfew, for another 60 days. Kenyatta spoke in a televised address after the World Bank approved $130 million for additional funds for Kenya to help it buy vaccines to tackle the pandemic. The Democratic Republic of Congo's military is blaming two explosions in the eastern city of Beni on the Allied Democratic Forces, a militant group which claims to have links to Islamic State. Angela Ukumadu has more.
At a church in Democratic Republic of Congo's eastern city of Beni, Father Isidore Masengo Kambale inspects the damage caused by an explosion. Schools, churches and markets have been ordered closed after two blasts hit the city at the weekend. A militia that claims to have links to Islamic State has been blamed. 2 people were injured at the church where Kambale said many of his parishioners had already been displaced by war.
It continues to instill fear in the hearts of Christians because in our parish there are many displaced people who have fled war in the bush and sought refuge in the city. And so when it comes to the town itself, it is even worse.
No one was killed apart from the suspected bomber, authorities said, after an explosive device detonated prematurely at a busy intersection. The army said Sunday's attacks bore the signature of the Allied Democratic Forces, which has used improvised explosive devices in the past. The ADF, which originally hails from Uganda, has been accused of killing thousands of people since 2014. mostly in massacres in remote villages. Islamic State, which has claimed dozens of killings blamed on the ADF, said 8 had carried out the attacks and that 2 people had died. However, UN experts say they've not found conclusive evidence that Islamic State has control over ADF operations. UN and independent experts have also cautioned that some attacks blamed on the ADF have in fact been carried out by different militias or factions of the Congolese army.
That was Angela Okumadu of Reuters reporting. When Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari ran for re-election in 2019, he cited his achievements, saying he had built the foundational work and that his next job would be to climb up the stairs to the next level. But recent headlines of insurgency, lawlessness, and kidnappings are raising concerns about his style of governance. I sought the perspective of Ngozi Bell, a native of Nigeria and a partner at the Trans-Sahara Investment Corporation. I began by asking what, in her opinion, went wrong.
That whole statement was political in nature. The president's health was dicey for much of his first term, so he spent the entire first term recuperating in London. The gap in leadership, unfortunately, allowed for a group of loyalists to take advantage or put a vice grip on the economic and political vision of Nigeria for their personal and tribal and religious benefits. So that selection of people, unfortunately, created an outcome that, affected real nation building. Unfortunately, it has led to a presidential office that appears nepotistic in its attitude and has eroded any sign of seriousness.
But take the Niger Delta, for example, which is rich in oil. You could call it Nigeria's ATM cash machine, but most residents are poor. We've seen reports of some turning to guns to make ends meet. How does the government respond to critics who say it is a deliberate move to exclude them from economic development?
To some extent, you have to agree with some of that sentiment. Unfortunately, though, because of nepotism, the Niger Delta continues to remain a cash cow. The other thing that is unfortunate is because of the poverty that the region experiences, the people themselves are sabotaging themselves. They go around trying to disrupt the gas production because they're trying to take advantage of the resources that they believe that they're producing. So because of that, they cause all kinds of contamination in their rivers. They cause all kinds of environmental issues, which also affects them. The government doesn't have any real strategy around helping the people. So it's a bit of a mess, Esther.
And then in the northern parts of the country, like Kaduna, are hotbeds for Boko Haram and other insurgent groups notorious for kidnappings. President Buhari made a promise to find the kidnapped Chibok girls in 2014, but dozens are still missing, Ngozi, and more have been kidnapped since then. Is the lack of political and economic inclusion to blame for these vices?
Esther, is all of the above. When you have key positions that are filled with either tribesmen or close allies, bad people are emboldened. Insurgents know how to exploit government weaknesses, which is what is happening. They attempt to create an insecure state, which is exactly what is happening. There's a lack of real arms that are given to soldiers to fight against these insurgents. So you have this mismatch of power. The police is incapable. The military is really incapable of fighting against them. The problem is fixable. If you put the right people in the right place who don't tiptoe around wrong, they will negotiate. They will be diplomatic. They will care about those people, but they will use force, adequate force where force is required. So again, it comes down to putting the right people for the right reasons in the right places.
Tomorrow, in part 2 of my interview with Ngozi Bell, she talks about Nigerians' quest for a constitutional review and the need for the federal government to grant reasonable autonomy to state governments to utilize their resources and generate wealth for the greater good of the country. COVID-19 is impacting people's lives and livelihoods around the world. However, observers say women are being affected disproportionately in many aspects, and the pandemic is having a regressive effect on gender equality. The Generation Equality Forum is underway in Paris Wednesday, bringing together governments, the private sector, and civil society partners to step up efforts toward gender equality and advance women's rights. As part of the forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on Wednesday announced a commitment of $2.1 billion over the next 5 years to advance women's economic empowerment, strengthen women and girls' health and family planning, and accelerate women's leadership. The foundation also released new data that showed that the coronavirus outbreak has exacerbated gender disparities. For more, Africa 54's Linord Moudou spoke with Mark Suzman, the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
The Gates Foundation will be making a significant commitment ourselves, a commitment of $2.1 billion over the next 5 years into several significant economic, social investments and a new program on women in leadership. And we're looking for other partners actors to do the same. There has been some progress that we need to pay attention to, but also really a call to action that, especially in the context of this pandemic, which has highlighted again how women have disproportionately borne the brunt of the economic and social impact.
These funds will focus economic empowerment, family planning and health, and also accelerating leadership. Why was it important to do so and focus specifically on these three areas?
We have a long tradition of work in family planning and support around women's health, and so that is a particular area where we see great needs, because again, that's an area that has seen a drop-off in access to family planning during the course of the pandemic over the last year, and a rise in unplanned pregnancies. And we have investments in new technologies that will make hopefully family planning more accessible, easier to use, safer. Women's economic empowerment, we've seen time and time again, when women get access to financial resources, whether it's access into bank accounts, to savings, training through what we call women's economic empowerment collectives, which are often called self-help groups, access to social payments from governments, they will tend to use those resources highly effectively, both for themselves but also their families, investing in their children. And then last, women are just very underrepresented in global leadership still. That is probably the biggest indictment after 25 years after Beijing.
What lessons have been learned in the process, and to what extent have these lessons shifted the work of the foundation?
One of the most important lessons, how do we make sure we are actually listening to the voices of the people on the ground, the women who have the need, that, what is holding them back? What are the challenges in their households? What are the challenges in their communities? What do they most look for in a family planning product? The second is being actually more thoughtful about the sets of partnerships, whether it's with United Nations agencies, whether it's with national governments. National governments, say particularly across Africa, have historically given very little resources into family planning directly. After 2012, there was a shift in that, and a number of countries like Kenya and others we've worked with have changed that and have started to make this more systematic. But we think that's something that we should need to build on and grow, and actually have partners in the government see that as a critical set of priorities.
The Gates Foundation released a new data that show pandemic-driven inequality is growing at an alarming pace. What were some of the key findings?
One of the most important ones has been the hit on women's employment. Even though at this stage there's almost been a full recovery in male employment globally, there are still 13 million women lost their jobs that have not regained their jobs. That's a huge gap, and that's why governments really need to focus and engage much more deeply on that.
How can we really shift these disparities in the workforce in the long run?
One other key area that part of our investments is going to come in is in childcare. That we know that women disproportionately tend to have the childcare burden, because we've had women having to spend up to 8 or 9 hours a day looking after children, particularly with schools closed and other challenges. And so a more systematic response that has governments and others providing support and institutional support.
How can governments and leaders locally contribute?
We need to see governments, I believe, some leaders, President Kenyatta will be in Paris, I think, and others making some commitments. What are the investments What are the metrics that we're going to use so that citizens can hold their own governments accountable for making the engagement and the follow-up? This time we hope, and it's not just governments, it needs to be civil society, it needs to be the private sector engagements, but our hope is that this is an event that is going to have rigorous follow-up. There are core metrics. Are there more women in parliament? Are there more women in government? Are there more women in senior healthcare positions? Are there more women in senior economic development positions? If they're not, we need to redouble those efforts.
What else is on the agenda for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation?
But in the short term, we're also still very, very focused on the COVID response, because this is a crisis that is not yet over. It's been very inequitable in terms of the rollout of vaccines, going disproportionately to the rich world and not the poor world, where only 1% of Africans are currently vaccinated. And we need to confront this crisis first in order to be able to lay the platform for these wider rebuilding in the gender equality and agricultural development in other areas like health and financial inclusion. We're trying to focus on all of that, but the central message is keeping gender at the heart of it and women's equality at the heart of it is the key way to get long-term success in all of these areas.
The message is clear. Mark Suzman, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you.
That was Africa 54 correspondent Linord Moudou speaking with Mark Suzman, CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Would like to know what you think about Africa 54? Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, how a meteorologist in Ghana is inspiring young people's interest in the weather. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. Many soldiers and civilians have been killed in the fighting in Ethiopia's Tigray region, according to a spokesman for the Ethiopian government task force for Tigray, Redwan Hussein. Wednesday's public statement is the first by any official in Ethiopia's federal government since Tigray's regional capital Mekelle was seized by Tigrayan forces this week. Hussein says the Ethiopian army could, however, re-enter Mekelle within weeks if needed, adding that a ceasefire declared on Monday was for humanitarian reasons. In Ethiopia, Tigrayan troops have regained control of the regional capital of Mekelle this week, prompting the government to declare an immediate ceasefire in the 8-month-long conflict. But U.S. lawmakers warned Tuesday the ceasefire may be only temporary and will likely not prevent a looming famine from impacting millions of people. VOA's congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more.
Celebrations in the streets of Mekelle as a unilateral ceasefire ends 8 months of conflict between the Ethiopian government and rebel troops from the TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front. But in Washington, a top U.S. lawmaker warns this pause in fighting may only be temporary.
I can only hope it opens the door to a peaceful resolution. However, I am hearing reports that the TPLF is threatening to enter Eritrea, which would be a clear and dangerous escalation in this conflict.
The conflict intensified last week when an Ethiopian military strike killed more than 60 people at a market in Tigray. Tigrayans accuse both Ethiopian and Eritrean troops of atrocities, including rape and blocking food and aid, resulting in a widespread famine.
War crimes, crimes against humanity, and acts of genocide have been carried out against the Tigrayan people. Last week, Prime Minister Abiy stated, quote, "There's no hunger in Tigray," unquote. The stunning denial of the catastrophic conditions on the ground in Tigray is appalling.
The U.S. Agency for International Development estimates up to 4.5 million of Tigray's 6 million residents require urgent food assistance. and nearly 900,000 people are already experiencing catastrophic conditions. The humanitarian toll of sexual violence is incalculable, one USAID official told lawmakers.
Perpetrators have targeted the wives of priests, abused women in front of their families, and used brutal violence against women. As I've said publicly before, the severity of abuse is among the absolute worst I have seen in my nearly 2 decades of humanitarian work.
According to the Ethiopian government, the ceasefire is scheduled to last through the end of the planting season in late September. That presents a window of opportunity for the United States and the international community.
The first priority is to capitalize on this ceasefire to try to gain access to communities in need, to stave off potential famine for up to 1 million people who are at risk right now. That's the first priority. I think the second priority is then trying to maintain and institutionalize this ceasefire in a way so that we can create the space for a political dialogue.
U.S. lawmakers are warning the costs of failing to create that space are high.
Or the sides just trying to look at this as the next phase of a protracted conflict morphing into a civil war.
What we need is a permanent ceasefire, which all of the parties are committed to. At the moment, we still do not have a statement from the TPLF or the Eritreans that they're committed to a ceasefire.
The U.S. State Department says it is fast-tracking a review of allegations of Ethiopian government atrocities in Tigray to determine if those actions meet the legal definition of war crimes. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
In our tech news, young women in Ghana often feel alone and isolated. But in Accra, Maureen Ahiataku is part of a group of younger meteorologists using her skills to empower and encourage young people to pursue careers in meteorology. For more perspective, Africa 54's technology correspondent Paul Ndiho spoke to Maureen Ahiataku, a meteorologist with the Ghana Meteorological Agency in Accra.
Maureen Ahiataku, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Paul. Nice to meet you, and I'm grateful for this opportunity.
You are the weather lady in Ghana. How did you become the weather lady?
I'm a meteorologist by profession, and when I was young, I have a passion to know more about the atmosphere, especially with the term of when you play ampe, that's a local game. In our tradition, in the night, you get stuck into the atmosphere. So I think that is where the passion all began from. So from my primary to senior high education, I proceeded to the university to pursue meteorology in climate science at the University of Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, that is in Ghana. From there, I graduated and I got the opportunity again to work with this institution, and I had the opportunity again to travel for my further studies outside Ghana, and that was in Iwa Women's University in South Korea, in Seoul. So I had the opportunity again to study atmospheric science and engineering. I still work with the Ghana Meteorological Agency as a meteorologist. Before I traveled, I was a forecaster, and I predict the weather. Then later on, after the studies, I've now moved into the hydrometeorology unit, mainly for research work.
When you're doing your weather forecast, what are some of the things that you look at?
We look at first, you need to know the season in which you are. That's one key thing you need to know. Then we use the satellite products. We use the models. Also, we run our local models here. We also use that. And then you need to use the observation from the station. So those are local observation in terms of information from your area, ground truth observation. This helps you to validate what the models and then the satellite informations are saying regards to your area of consideration or area of study. So you also look out for the moisture, so that's the relative humidity, and we look out for the energy in the atmosphere, that's the CAPE, also tend to see whether the energy in the atmosphere is enough when we have the heating or insulation.
When you talk to your friends, when you interact with the people who don't know about the weather, what are some of the things what kind of questions are people asking you?
Yeah, mostly that is the question. The moment you mention, oh, I'm a meteorologist or I work with the weather institution, everybody will just want to know, okay, will it rain today or will it not rain? And or what will be the weather for in the few days? These are some of the questions that they will pose to you to know whether it will rain or not.
A lot of people talk about climate change in Ghana, where you are. When you go to northern Ghana, that place is always very, very hot. Even in areas of Accra, I've been in Accra like around May, and it was very, very hot. I just could barely, stay outside. So what role do you play when it comes to maybe telling your friends about climate change?
On a weekly basis, the forecasters come out with the forecasts. So per my unit, which is more of hydrometeorology, we collect more of the rainfall information across the country, try to analyze this to see whether the forecast that was given, how it performed over the various areas. So we process this into a mass of visualized data for the forecasters to use. Aside that, too, we run models to see how these rainfall patterns will be in the weeks ahead of time. So we also give this also to the forecasters to use in conjunction with the other satellite products as well. Also, we undertake research to find out, as you make climate change, a lot of people, well, especially with the high impact in terms of flood that we are getting, people are being affected. So a lot of people will be like, is it the heavy rainfalls that we are getting that is causing this flood? So we undertake a research to see whether these floods are actually meteorologically induced or they are from human activities. And this study is online as we undertake meteorological analysis of flood within Ghana. We look at 2 cities, and we've realized that currently the storms that track over our regions, naturally, yes, some of them produce heavy rainfall, but most of the flood that we are experiencing are due to human impacts. Like we have choked gutters, less drainage systems are not even there. A lot of places are being paved, so the water is not even able to percolate well into the soil, so they run off, causing floods around.
Well, Maureen, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Africa 54 tech correspondent Paul Ndiho speaking to Maureen Ahiataku in Accra, Ghana. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.
Be sure to join me on the next Straight Talk Africa when we talk about reparations and redress as Namibia negotiates with Germany on compensation for colonial-era genocide. We ask, how much is enough to make amends for atrocities and other sins of the past? We'll look at lessons from other parts of Africa and the world and hear from Namibians about what this means for the future of their country. Reparations, remorse, and redress on the next Straight Talk Africa.